Welcome to World of Sleepcraft. Tonight we explore the complete story of the Void Lords, the most terrifying entities in all of Warcraft lore, and the true masterminds behind the Old Gods, whose hunger for destruction threatens not just Azeroth, but the very fabric of reality itself. Before there was time, before there was space, before the first star flickered to life in the endless darkness, there was only the light. Imagine an infinite ocean of pure, radiant energy, swelling and shifting across all of existence without boundary or limit. This primordial light knew no constraints of time or space, for neither concept had yet come into being. It simply was an endless expanse of brilliant, living energy that stretched across the totality of what we might call reality. But nothing in existence can remain static forever. As eons beyond counting passed in this formless eternity, something began to change. Some of the light's energies started to fade and dim, like embers cooling at the edges of a great fire. In these places, where the radiance weakened, pockets of cold nothingness began to form. These were not merely dark spaces, but rather the complete absence of light itself, voids where the brilliant energy could not reach. From this absence, or from these cold and empty spaces, a new power began to coalesce. This was the void, and it was unlike anything that had existed before. Where the light was warm and nurturing, the void was cold and consuming. Where the light spread life and hope, the void hungered only to devour. It was a dark and vampiric force, driven by an insatiable need to consume all energy, to twist creation inward upon itself until nothing remained but endless shadow. The void grew quickly, spreading through the spaces between the light, like shadow creeping across a sunlit field at dusk. It pushed against the boundaries of the light, testing its limits, seeking to expand its domain of cold emptiness. Where the light still shone brightest, the void could not penetrate. But in those places where the radiance had faded, where the endless ocean of brilliance had grown thin and weak, the shadow crept in like water through cracks in a dam. The first proto-Void Lords emerged during this primordial age, though they were not yet the terrible entities they would become. In the beginning, they were simply concentrations of shadow, places where the void had gathered into something resembling consciousness. They had no names, no individual identities, no purposes beyond the fundamental nature of the void itself. To consume, to corrupt, to unmake. As the void continued to spread, these proto-entities grew in power and awareness. They began to develop something like thought, something like will, something like desire. And what they desired was simple: more darkness, more shadow, more of themselves. They hungered for the light, not to possess it or to understand it, but to consume it, to drag it into the endless nothing from which they had emerged. Before long, the mounting tension between these two opposing forces became unbearable. The light and the void had grown so vast, so powerful, so fundamentally incompatible that the fabric of existence itself could not contain them both. Reality itself groaned under the strain of housing such opposite forces, like a vessel trying to hold both fire and ice at once. What happened next was cataclysmic beyond mortal comprehension. The light and the void collided in a series of explosions so vast and powerful that they ruptured the very foundation of existence. Reality itself shattered and reformed, and from this cosmic violence, the physical universe was born. Stars ignited across the newly formed great dark beyond. Planets coalesced from clouds of cosmic dust. Time and space emerged as concepts with meaning. The universe, as we know it, had begun. But the light and the void did not simply dissipate after this cosmic birth. They remained, forever bound, together in eternal opposition. The void could not exist without the light to define its darkness, just as the light required the void to give meaning to its radiance. They were two halves of the same cosmic whole, locked in a struggle that would continue for all eternity. This fundamental duality would shape everything that followed, from the grandest cosmic events to the smallest mortal struggles. In certain places where these two forces continued to clash, a strange dimensional realm formed. This was the twisting nether, an astral dimension where light and void energies ceaselessly battled one another. It became a chaotic realm of swirling energies, neither fully light nor fully void, but something in between. The twisting nether would become home to countless beings, some born from its chaotic energies, others seeking refuge within its ever-shifting boundaries. Other cosmic forces would eventually emerge as well, each taking its place in the grand design of existence. Order arose as a force of structure and stability, seeking to impose pattern and purpose upon the chaos of the newborn universe. Its opposite, disorder, embraced entropy and destruction, reveling in the breakdown of all things ordered. Life emerged as a force of growth and renewal, constantly pushing existence toward greater complexity and vitality. Death balanced life, ensuring that all things would eventually end and return their energies to the cosmic cycle. These six forces, light and void, order and disorder, life and death, formed the foundation of the Warcraft cosmos. Each had its own realms, its own servants, its own purposes. But among them all, the eternal struggle between light and void would remain the most fundamental conflict, the most ancient and bitter rivalry, the war that began before time itself and would continue until the end of all things. From the scattered remnants of the light that drifted through the great dark beyond, certain beings began to form. Shards of fractured radiance would occasionally gather together into clouds of concentrated light, and from these clouds emerged powerful entities known as the Naru. These beings of pure light gazed out across the newborn universe and saw limitless possibilities. They vowed to use their mastery of holy magic to nurture life and hope throughout the cosmos, becoming guardians and guides for the mortal races that would one day emerge. The Naru were creatures of extraordinary beauty and power. They appeared as crystalline structures of pure radiance, their forms constantly shifting and pulsing with holy energy. When they spoke, their voices resonated with harmonies that touched the soul itself. They could heal the wounded, purify the corrupted, and inspire hope in even the most desperate hearts. The Naru became champions of the light, traveling across the cosmos to nurture civilizations and oppose the spread of darkness wherever they found it. But the void produced its own entities as well, and these were far less benevolent than the Naru. Deep within the darkest reaches of the void, where shadow energy was densest and most concentrated, monstrous beings began to take form. These were the Void Lords, entities composed entirely of pure shadow energy, and they were merciless and cruel beyond mortal imagination. Where the Naru brought hope and healing, the Void Lords brought only despair and corruption. Where the Naru sought to nurture life, the Void Lords hungered only to consume it. The Void Lords are unlike any other beings in the Warcraft universe. They are not creatures in the conventional sense, not beings of flesh and blood that were born and will one day die. They are manifestations of the void itself, living embodiments of that cold and hungry nothingness that exists beyond the borders of reality. Their very essence is composed of shadow energy, that dark and consuming force that emerged from the absence of light at the dawn of creation. To truly understand the Void Lords, one must first understand that they exist outside the physical universe. The great dark beyond, that vast expanse of space where stars burn and planets spin, is not their home. They dwell in the void itself, that realm of pure shadow that exists beyond the boundaries of physical reality. From this dark dimension, they gaze upon the universe with eyes that see nothing but hunger, nothing but the desire to consume and corrupt. The realm of the void is a place that defies mortal comprehension. It is not a location in any conventional sense, not a place that can be visited or mapped. It is the antithesis of existence itself, a dimension of absolute darkness where physical laws have no meaning. Within the void, shadow energy swirls in patterns that would drive mortal minds to madness if they could perceive them. Time does not flow there as it does in the physical universe. Space holds no meaning. There is only the endless hungry darkness and the terrible beings that dwell within it. The motivations of the Void Lords are terrifyingly simple. They seek to twist reality into a realm of eternal torment. They wish to devour all matter and energy in the universe. They hunger to consume existence itself, to drag all of creation into the endless shadow of the void, where nothing would remain but darkness and despair. There is no negotiation with such beings, no possibility of peace or coexistence. They exist only to destroy, to corrupt, and to consume. Some scholars who have studied the nature of the void suggest that the Void Lord's hunger is not truly malevolent in the way mortal beings understand malevolence. They are not cruel because they enjoy causing suffering. They are simply acting according to their nature, as a fire burns or as water flows downhill. The void consumes because that is what the void does. The Void Lords embody this consumption, this endless hunger, and they cannot be anything other than what they are. This philosophical perspective, however comforting it might be to those who study such things, provides no comfort to those who must face the void's corruption. Whether the Void Lords act from malice or simply from nature, the result is the same: worlds consumed, civilizations destroyed, minds shattered by whispers that never cease. The academic distinction between evil that chooses to be evil and evil that cannot help but be evil means nothing to the victims of either. What matters is that the Void Lords are implacable enemies who can never be reasoned with, never be bargained with, never be deterred from their ultimate goal. They will continue their assault on reality until either they succeed in consuming all existence or they are somehow stopped. There is no middle ground, no possibility of peace. The war between the void and everything else that exists is eternal and absolute. The Void Lords communicate with each other and with their servants through means that mortal beings cannot fully comprehend. Their whispers carry through the spaces between dimensions, reaching across vast distances to touch the minds of those who are susceptible to their influence. These whispers are not words in the conventional sense, but impressions, emotions, urges that worm their way into thought and dream. Those who hear them rarely realize that the thoughts they are having are not their own. This is one of the most insidious aspects of void corruption. It begins so subtly that its victims do not recognize what is happening. A thought here, an impulse there, a dream that leaves one feeling strangely drawn to the darkness. By the time the corruption becomes obvious, it is often too late. The victim has already been reshaped by the whispers, their will eroded, their sense of self compromised. They become tools of the void without ever making a conscious choice to serve it. Yet despite their vast power and their cosmic ambitions, the Void Lords face a fundamental limitation that shapes all of their actions. They cannot easily exist within the physical universe. When a Void Lord attempts to manifest in physical reality, its shadow energies quickly begin to seep away into nothingness. The very fabric of the physical universe resists their presence, causing their power to dissipate like smoke in a strong wind. This limitation is fundamental to understanding the Void Lord's strategies and schemes. The physical universe was born from the clash of light and void, but it is not a neutral battleground. The very laws that govern physical reality seem to favor existence over non-existence, substance over emptiness, light over darkness. A void Lord entering the physical universe is like a creature of ice, trying to survive in a furnace. It can be done, but only with tremendous effort and at great cost. Only the most powerful of the Void Lords can manage to manifest in the physical universe at all, and even then, they can only do so in a weakened state and for limited periods of time. To maintain their presence in physical reality, these entities must constantly consume vast amounts of matter and energy, feeding on the substance of the universe itself just to keep from fading away entirely. This limitation would prove to be the driving force behind their most sinister schemes. For countless eons, the Void Lords watched from their realm of shadow as the physical universe unfolded. They observed the formation of worlds, watched as planets coalesced from cosmic dust, and began their slow journey toward whatever destiny awaited them. They witnessed the emergence of life, that strange phenomenon where matter arranged itself into patterns that could think and feel and grow. And most importantly of all, they witnessed the rise of the Titans. The Titans were beings of immense power, born from world souls that slumbered within certain planets throughout the great dark beyond. These world souls were spirits of order, fragments of that cosmic force that sought to impose structure and stability upon existence. As they grew in power within their planetary hosts, they slowly became aware of themselves, developing consciousness over millions of years. When they finally awakened and emerged from their planetary wombs, the Titans were beings of incredible might, entities that shaped worlds and ordered the cosmos according to their vision. The Void Lords watched the Titans with something that might be called envy, if such beings could truly experience emotion. Here were creatures that could exist freely in the physical universe, beings of immense power that could shape reality according to their will. The Void Lords desired that power. They coveted the might of the Titans, and they began to scheme about how they might claim it for themselves. Their first attempts at corruption were direct and ultimately futile. The Void Lords reached out from their realm of shadow, extending tendrils of dark influence toward the awakened Titans of the Pantheon. They whispered to them in dreams, sent visions of darkness and despair, tried to plant seeds of corruption in their minds. But the Titans remained impervious to these efforts. Their connection to the cosmic force of order was too strong, their minds too disciplined and focused. The whispers of the void slid off their consciousness like water off stone. The awakened Titans possessed a fundamental stability that made them resistant to void corruption. Their very nature was one of order, of structure and pattern and purpose. The chaos and entropy of the void found no purchase in their ordered minds. No matter how persistently the Void Lords whispered, no matter how seductive their promises of power, the Titans simply could not be turned. Their minds were fortresses that the shadow could not breach. This failure forced the Void Lords to reconsider their approach. If they could not corrupt the Titans in their awakened state, perhaps they could reach them when they were more vulnerable. A fully formed Titan was apparently immune to void corruption, but what about a Titan that had not yet awakened? What about a world soul still slumbering within its planetary shell, not yet aware of itself, not yet able to defend its mind against outside influence? The more the Void Lords contemplated this idea, the more promising it seemed. A sleeping world soul was defenseless, its dreams unguarded, its developing consciousness exposed to whatever influences might reach it. These nascent beings spent millions of years slowly growing in power, their awareness developing at a pace that made mortal lifetimes seem like the blink of an eye. During all that time, they were vulnerable, their forming minds open to corruption in ways that awakened Titans simply were not. If the Void Lords could corrupt a world soul before it awakened, if they could twist its development and infuse it with shadow energy, then when that world soul finally emerged as a Titan, it would not be a being of order, but a being of void. It would be a dark Titan, an entity of cosmic power utterly devoted to the Void Lords and their cause. Such a being would combine the Titan's ability to exist in physical reality with the Void Lord's hunger for destruction and corruption. The Void Lords realized that such a dark Titan would be unstoppable. Even the mighty Pantheon, those awakened Titans who ordered worlds and fought against chaos, would be unable to stand against one of their own kind, twisted to serve the void. A Titan possessed power beyond anything else in the physical universe. A Titan devoted to the void's purposes would be able to spread corruption across the cosmos without the limitations that hampered the Void Lords themselves. With a dark Titan as their champion, the Void Lords could finally extend their influence throughout the physical universe. They could drag all of existence into the shadow of the void, achieving their ultimate goal of consuming reality itself. With their plan conceived, the Void Lords set about implementing it in the most terrible way imaginable. They gathered their power, pooling the shadow energies of countless void entities into a concentrated effort of creation. This was perhaps the greatest act of will the Void Lords had ever undertaken, a focusing of their collective hunger into a singular purpose. From this collective darkness, they forged beings of nightmare, entities specifically designed to find world souls and corrupt them to the service of the void. These creations were the old gods, and they would become the most devastating plague ever unleashed upon the physical universe. The Void Lords crafted them with terrible precision, giving them forms that could exist in physical reality while retaining the essential nature of the void. They were parasites of the highest order, designed to burrow into worlds and corrupt them from within, to whisper madness into dreaming minds, to twist all things toward shadow and despair. The Void Lords gave their creations certain abilities that would aid them in their purpose. The old gods could sense the dreams of sleeping beings, could reach into minds and plant seeds of corruption that would grow over centuries. They could corrupt the very matter around them, transforming ordinary stone and soil into extensions of themselves. They could create servants from their own substance, armies of horrors that would spread their influence across whatever world they infested. Most importantly, the Void Lords gave the old gods patience. These creations would not need quick victories. They could wait for eons, slowly corrupting their targets over millions of years if necessary. They understood that the corruption of a world soul was not a task that could be accomplished in a single generation or even a single millennium. It was a project that might span the entire lifespan of a world, and they were prepared for that. The creation of the old gods was an act of cosmic violence that rippled across the void itself. The Void Lords poured their essence into these creations, shaping shadow energy into physical forms that could exist in the material universe. The old gods were designed to be parasites of the highest order, beings that could infest a world and slowly corrupt it from within. They would not simply destroy the worlds they touched. They would twist them, reshape them, turn them into breeding grounds for the shadow. The old gods were unlike anything else in existence. They were physical manifestations of the void itself, eldritch horrors composed of writhing tentacles and countless eyes, masses of blighted flesh that defied all natural law. Their forms were nightmarish amalgamations of organic matter and shadow energy, constantly shifting and pulsing with dark power. They were called Shathyar in their own dark tongue, and they were designed with a singular purpose in mind. They would drift through the cosmos, crash into worlds, and begin the slow process of corruption that might eventually produce a dark titan. Each old god was unique, possessing its own personality, its own methods, its own domain of influence. Some were masters of madness, driving mortal minds to insanity with whispered promises and horrific visions. Others specialized in physical corruption, transforming the very flesh of those they touched into blighted mockeries of life. Still others were creatures of death and decay, spreading entropy and dissolution wherever their influence reached. But all shared the same fundamental purpose: to find and corrupt Titan world souls for the greater glory of the void. The Void Lords faced one significant problem with their plan. They did not know which planets in the vast universe contained Titan world souls. These nascent beings were hidden within their planetary shells, their presence undetectable from the darkness of the void. The world souls gave off no signal that the Void Lords could perceive, no beacon that would guide the old gods to their targets. The Void Lords could not simply target specific worlds for their old god creations. Instead, they were forced to rely on a strategy of blind hope and cosmic probability. Pooling their power one final time, the Void Lords hurled their old god creations out into the universe in all directions. These dark, parasitic horrors streaked through the great dark beyond like malevolent comets, each seeking a world to infest. The Void Lords could only hope that at least some of their creations would smash into planets that contained slumbering world souls. Given the vastness of the universe and the unknown distribution of world souls. This was a gamble of cosmic proportions. The old gods fell upon countless worlds throughout the great dark beyond. Most of these worlds contained no world souls, and the old gods that landed upon them could do little more than corrupt the local life and wait for opportunities that might never come. But some old gods were luckier. They found worlds where world souls slumbered, and they immediately began their corrupting work, reaching toward those nascent titans with tendrils of shadow and whispers of madness. As it turned out, the gamble paid off far better than the Void Lords could have hoped. Multiple old gods found their way to worlds containing world souls, and the corruption began. But of all the worlds touched by the old gods, one would prove to be the most significant of all. This was Azeroth, a planet harboring what would one day be recognized as the most powerful world soul in the entire universe. 4 old gods descended upon Azeroth in those primordial days, crashing into the young world with devastating force. Their impact shook the foundations of the planet, sending shockwaves through the crust that would take ages to settle. Where they landed, the land itself was blighted, transformed by the concentrated void energies that radiated from their massive forms. Their names would become synonymous with horror and corruption across countless ages to come. Y'Sharj, the most powerful of them all, sometimes called the beast with 7 heads or the 7-headed one. This massive entity was the largest and most terrible of the old gods that landed on Azeroth. Its 7 heads represented different aspects of corruption, different ways in which it could twist and control the minds and bodies of those who fell under its influence. Y'Sharj's power was so great that it would take a Titan's direct intervention to destroy it, and even then, its influence would linger for millennia. S'thun, whose massive form appeared as a great demonic eye perched atop a tower of tentacles, was the god of chaos and insanity. This old god specialized in driving mortal minds to madness, whispering to them in dreams and visions, slowly eroding their sanity until they became willing servants of the shadow. S'thun's influence spread not through physical corruption, but through mental manipulation, turning enemies into allies and sane beings into gibbering servants. Yogg-Saron, the god of death, was perhaps the most insidious of the old gods. Unlike its siblings, Yogg-Saron spread its influence through both mind and matter, corrupting not just the thoughts of those who dwelled upon Azeroth, but the very substance of the world itself. Its black blood seeped through the earth, hardening into a metal called saronite that drove mad any who worked with it for too long. Yogg-Saron called itself the beast with 1,000 maws, and it hungered endlessly for the destruction of all things. N'Zoth, as the Deep One, was the smallest and seemingly weakest of the old gods, but it would prove to be the most patient and cunning of them all. While its siblings raged and consumed and corrupted with abandon, N'Zoth worked slowly, carefully, spinning webs of manipulation that would take thousands of years to come to fruition. It was N'Zoth who corrupted the dragon aspect Neltharion, turning him into the monster known as Deathwing. It was N'Zoth who created the Emerald Nightmare, that corruption of the realm of dreams. And it was N'Zoth who would outlast all of its siblings, continuing its schemes long after the others had been defeated. These 4 eldritch horrors embedded themselves in Azeroth's surface and immediately began their corrupting work. Their impact was not merely physical, but metaphysical, tearing holes in the fabric of reality through which void energy could seep into the material world. Where they landed, the laws of nature themselves began to break down, replaced by the twisted logic of nightmare and shadow. They sent their tentacles drilling down through the planet's crust, reaching toward the defenseless world soul at Azeroth's core. These were not merely physical appendages, but conduits of corruption, channels through which the old gods could pour their malevolent influence directly into the nascent Titan. Each tendril that touched the world souls carried with it whispers of madness, visions of darkness, promises of power that came with chains of eternal servitude. A miasma of despair spread across the land wherever their influence touched, twisting everything it encountered. Plants grew in impossible shapes, their leaves black and their flowers oozing corruption. Animals became warped mockeries of their former selves, driven mad by exposure to energies that no natural creature could withstand. The very air seemed to thicken with malevolence, carrying whispers that promised power to any who would listen and obey. The very reality around them began to warp and change, shaped by the concentrated void energies that seeped from their massive forms. In the regions closest to the old gods, the boundaries between dimensions grew thin. Creatures from the void found it easier to manifest in these corrupted zones, and those who dwelt too long within them found their minds slowly slipping away, replaced by devotion to the shadow. The world soul felt this corruption and recoiled from it, but there was nowhere for it to go. It was trapped within the planet that the old gods had infested, unable to flee, unable to fight back. It could only suffer as the corruption slowly spread through its developing consciousness, twisting its dreams from visions of light and order into nightmares of shadow and chaos. From the organic matter that oozed from the old gods' blighted bodies, new races of servitors emerged. The Naraki, also known as Faceless Ones, arose as cunning and devoted servants of their old god masters. These creatures appeared as twisted humanoids, with faces that were nothing but masses of tentacles, their forms constantly shifting and changing as if they could not maintain a stable shape. The Faceless Ones were intelligent, capable of strategy and deception, and they served as generals and commanders in the old gods' armies. The Akir emerged as well, insectoid creatures that would later evolve into various forms, including the Chiraji and the Nerubians. These beings were less individually intelligent than the Faceless Ones, but they made up for this with their numbers and their perfect devotion to their masters. The Akir spread across Azeroth like a plague, building hive cities and warring against any who opposed the old gods' dominion. They would later split into several distinct races, each developing its own culture and civilization while never entirely forgetting the darkness that had spawned them. These servitor races immediately set about serving their dark masters, constructing great citadels and temple cities around the massive forms of the old gods. These structures were not mere buildings, but extensions of the old gods themselves, their architecture designed to channel and amplify void energy. The cities of the Black Empire were places of nightmare, their geometry defying mortal comprehension, their corridors filled with horrors that no sane mind could endure. What emerged from this period of uncontested old god dominion was the Black Empire, the darkest civilization ever to exist on Azeroth. For countless ages, the old gods ruled absolutely over the world, their influence spreading ever deeper, their corruption reaching ever closer to the slumbering world soul at Azeroth's heart. The Black Empire covered much of the planet, a realm of nightmare and shadow where the Inraki and Akir served their eldritch masters without question. The name Black Empire does not fully convey the horror of what this civilization represented. It was not merely a political entity or a center of power. It was a manifestation of the Void's corruption made manifest on a planetary scale. Every structure built during this age was designed to channel Void energy. Every ritual performed served to deepen the corruption. Every being born within the Empire's bounds was shaped from birth to serve the old god's purposes. The land itself was transformed. Mountains were reshaped into twisted spires that reached toward the darkened sky. Rivers ran with water that was tainted by the old god's influence, carrying corruption to every corner of the world. Forests became tangles of nightmare vegetation, their trees whispering in voices that drove travelers mad. Even the weather was affected, as perpetual storms of shadow energy raged across continents, blocking out the sun and ensuring that the Empire existed in eternal twilight. This was the future that the Void Lords had planned for all of existence. If Azeroth's world soul could be corrupted, if a dark titan could be created from its power, this nightmare civilization would spread across the cosmos. World after world would fall to the shadow. Star after star would be dimmed by void energy. The entire universe would become one vast black empire, a realm of eternal darkness where the Void Lord's hunger would at last be satisfied. The society of the Black Empire was structured around the worship and service of the old gods. The Faceless Ones formed a priestly caste, interpreting the will of their masters and directing the efforts of lesser servants. The Akir served as soldiers and workers, their hive minds perfectly suited to the tasks their masters required of them. Other beings, corrupted by void energy or created from the old god's essence, filled various roles in this dark civilization. All existed only to serve the old god's ultimate purpose, the corruption of Azeroth's world soul. Before the old god's arrival, Azeroth had been ruled by the elemental lords, powerful beings of fire, water, earth, and air who commanded vast armies of lesser elementals. These were ancient and mighty entities, each embodying one of the fundamental forces of nature. Ragnaros commanded the flames, his burning rage capable of melting mountains. Therazane held dominion over the earth, her patience as enduring as stone. Neptulon ruled the waters, his depths concealing secrets beyond counting. Al'Akir commanded the winds, his fury capable of leveling cities. When the old gods descended upon the world, the elemental lords attempted to resist, marshaling their forces to repel the invaders. The wars that followed shook Azeroth to its foundations. Earthquakes split the land as Therazane's forces clashed with the Akir. Firestorms swept across continents as Ragnaros hurled his armies against the Faceless Ones. Tidal waves crashed against shores as Neptulon's water elementals fought to push back the spreading corruption. Hurricanes raged endlessly as Al'Akir's wind servants battled the flying horrors that served the old gods. But the old gods' power proved too great. One by one, the elemental lords were defeated and enslaved, forced to serve the very beings they had tried to destroy. The old gods bound them with chains of shadow, compelling their obedience through a combination of force and corruption. The once proud elemental lords became servants of the Black Empire, their powers turned to the purpose of corrupting Azeroth rather than protecting it. With the elementals subjugated and the Black Empire firmly established, the old gods turned their full attention to their primary objective. They continued to extend their influence deeper into Azeroth, their corrupting tendrils slowly wrapping around the world soul at the planet's core. The dreams of the nascent Titan began to twist and darken, turning from peaceful slumber into horrific nightmares. If nothing interrupted this process, Azeroth would eventually awaken not as a Titan of order, but as a dark Titan of the void. The old gods did not work in perfect harmony during this period. Despite sharing the same ultimate goal, they were rivals as much as allies. Each old god sought to be the one whose influence ultimately dominated the world soul, the one who would receive the most credit when the Dark Titan finally awakened, and Zoth's forces battled against those of Sithun and Yogg-Saron in wars that raged across the Black Empire, even as they collectively worked to corrupt the world soul. Some accounts even suggest that a fifth old god may have existed during this time, one that the others eventually ganged up on and consumed. The being known as Xal'atath, whose consciousness would later be bound within a dark blade, may be the last remnant of this devoured entity. If true, this suggests that the old gods were capable of turning on their own kind, consuming a sibling to increase their own power. Such behavior would be entirely consistent with their nature as beings of void and corruption. For ages beyond counting, the Black Empire flourished while the world soul slowly succumbed to corruption. The old gods believed their victory was inevitable. They had time on their side, patience that spanned millennia, and a captive world that could not escape their influence. All they needed to do was wait, and eventually, the Dark Titan would arise to serve the Void Lords' ultimate purpose. They did not know that they had already attracted the attention of beings who would not stand idly by while a world soul was corrupted. Far across the great dark beyond, the pantheon of titans continued their endless work of bringing order to the cosmos. These awakened world souls traveled from world to world in great cosmic vessels, shaping planets and nurturing the development of other slumbering world souls they discovered. They were beings of almost incomprehensible power, each one capable of reshaping entire worlds with their will alone. Mountains rose at their command, seas formed where they wished. The very continents of planets moved according to their design. The Titans represented the cosmic force of order at its most powerful. They believed that the universe should be structured, organized, purposeful. Every world they visited, they shaped according to their vision, imposing patterns that would encourage the development of life and civilization. They created guardians to watch over the worlds they ordered, established systems that would maintain stability long after they had moved on. Their goal was nothing less than the perfection of all creation. They had no knowledge of the Void Lords at this time. The Titans had encountered the Void, certainly, had seen its corruption on worlds touched by shadow, but they did not yet understand the true nature of the threat they faced. They did not know that entities of pure darkness watched their work from beyond the boundaries of reality, plotting to corrupt everything the Titans sought to build. This ignorance would not last forever. The pantheon consisted of several mighty Titans, each with their own domain and responsibilities. Aman'Thul, the High Father, was the leader of the pantheon, a being of immense wisdom and power who coordinated the efforts of his fellow Titans. Sargeras served as the Pantheon's champion and defender, the mightiest warrior among them, tasked with protecting the ordered cosmos from the forces of chaos. Xal'atath was the Titan of craft and forging, whose skill in shaping matter was unmatched. Eoner embodied life and nature, nurturing growth wherever she went. Norgannon represented knowledge and magic, keeper of the celestial archives. Golganath commanded the seas and skies, his power over weather and water unequaled. Chief among their champions was Agramar, a mighty Titan who served as the Pantheon's vanguard and defender alongside Sargeras. Agramar traveled ahead of the other Titans, scouting the cosmos for worlds that needed their attention, identifying threats and opportunities that the Pantheon should address. It was in this role that he made a discovery that would change the fate of the universe. It was Agramar who first discovered Azeroth, and what he found there filled him with horror. The world was covered in darkness and corruption, its surface dominated by the nightmarish Black Empire. The old gods had spread their influence across the entire planet, their citadels and temple cities standing as monuments to shadow and despair. The servitor races of the old gods swarmed across every continent, and the enslaved elemental lords raged in servitude to their new masters. More alarming still was what Agramar sensed at the planet's core. Here was a world soul of extraordinary power, perhaps the most powerful world soul in all of existence. Agramar had encountered many world souls during his travels across the cosmos, but none had possessed the potential that he sensed within Azeroth. This nascent Titan, if allowed to awaken uncorrupted, might become the mightiest being in the entire universe, and it was being corrupted by entities that radiated pure void energy. Agramar immediately brought word of his discovery back to the Pantheon. The Titans gathered to discuss this dire situation, their immense forms convening in the cosmic void to deliberate on the fate of a single world. What they learned troubled them greatly. They had encountered void-touched worlds before, worlds where the shadow had taken root and begun its corrupting work, but never anything like this. The world soul of Azeroth was remarkable, a nascent titan of unprecedented potential. The Titan's calculations and observations suggested that if this world soul was allowed to complete its development free of corruption, it might become the most powerful Titan to ever exist. It might even possess power sufficient to defeat the Void Lords themselves, to end the threat of the shadow once and for all. But if the corruption continued, if it awakened as a being of void rather than order, the consequences would be catastrophic beyond imagining. The Titans knew they could not allow this to happen. They resolved to save Azeroth, to cleanse it of the old god's corruption, and ensure that the world soul could develop as nature intended. But they faced a significant challenge. These Titans themselves were beings of immense size and power, and Agramar feared that if they descended upon Azeroth directly, they might accidentally damage or even kill the world soul they were trying to save. A Titan's footstep could shatter continents. A Titan's breath could strip away atmospheres. The very presence of such beings might prove fatal to the delicate world soul growing within the planet. A more delicate approach was required. Under the guidance of Xal'atath, the Titan of craft and forging, the Pantheon created a new army to serve as their agents on Azeroth. These were the Titan Forged, constructs shaped from the very crust of Azeroth itself. The Aesir were fashioned from metal and given dominion over the power of storms. They were warriors of incredible might, capable of channeling lightning and thunder against the enemies of order. The Vanir were formed from stone and granted mastery over the earth. They were steadfast and enduring, able to shape the land itself according to the Pantheon's will. These constructs would be able to wage war against the old gods without risking damage to the world soul. They were extensions of the Titan's will, carrying out the Pantheon's orders with perfect obedience and dedication. Though individually far less powerful than the Titans themselves, collectively they formed an army capable of challenging even the might of the Black Empire. To lead this Titan-forged army, the Pantheon created special beings called the Keepers. Each member of the Pantheon imbued certain Titan-forged with specific aspects of their own power and likeness, creating 9 mighty beings to serve as generals in the coming war. These Keepers were far more powerful than ordinary Titan-forged, blessed with fragments of the Titan's own essence that granted them abilities beyond those of their lesser brethren. Arcadus was given mastery over stone and earth, becoming the perfect administrator and overseer. Loken received gifts of cunning and subtlety, becoming a master of strategy and manipulation. Thorim was blessed with the power of storms, becoming a warrior of devastating might. Freya was granted dominion over life and nature, becoming a nurturer and healer of the land. Mimiron received the gift of invention and creation, becoming a master craftsman capable of building wonders. Hodor was given power over ice and cold, becoming a guardian of the frozen places. Tyr received the blessing of courage and protection, becoming a champion and defender of the innocent. Ra was granted mastery over light and the sun, becoming a beacon of hope in the darkness. Odin was given authority over souls and valor, becoming a judge and keeper of the honored dead. These 9 keepers were tasked with leading the Titan forged against the Black Empire and saving Azeroth from the corruption of the Void. They would descend upon the world, break the power of the old gods, and establish safeguards to protect the world soul as it continued its development. The fate of the universe rested on their success. The war that followed was unlike anything Azeroth had ever seen. The Titan Forged descended upon the world in force, their armies clashing with the endless legions of the Naraki and Akir. The Keepers led the charge, their incredible power turning the tide in battle after battle. Lightning crashed and mountains shattered as the forces of order met the forces of void in combat that shook the foundations of the world. The citadels of the Black Empire crumbled before their assault. Fortresses that had stood for ages fell in days as the Titan Forged brought the full might of the Pantheon's creations to bear. The servitor races of the old gods were pushed back across the face of Azeroth, their numbers dwindling as battle after battle went against them. For the first time since their arrival on Azeroth, the old gods faced an enemy capable of opposing their might. First, the Titan Forged dealt with the enslaved elemental lords. Rather than destroying these powerful beings, the Keepers crafted a separate dimension called the Elemental Plane and banished the elemental lords there, removing them from the conflict entirely. This was both a mercy and a strategic necessity. The elemental lords were not truly evil, merely enslaved. By removing them to their own realm, The keepers ensured that they could no longer be used as weapons by the old gods, while also preserving beings that were fundamental to Azeroth's natural order. With the elementals no longer a factor, the Titan Forged could focus their full attention on the old gods themselves. The victories over the Akir and the elementals encouraged the keepers, but they knew their greatest battles were yet to come. They turned their attention to the heart of the Black Empire, the sprawling temple city built around the mightiest of the old gods. If they could destroy Y'Sharj, the most powerful of the old gods, they believed they could break the Black Empire's power in a single decisive stroke. What happened next would prove to be one of the greatest mistakes in the history of the cosmos. Y'Sharj proved too powerful for the Titan Forged to defeat on their own. The seven-headed god marshaled all of its power against them, its influence driving Titan Forged to madness, its servants throwing themselves against the Keeper's forces with suicidal fury. The assault stalled, then began to fail, as Y'Sharj's might proved greater than anything the Titan Forged could overcome. The Keeper Ra called out to the Pantheon for assistance, and Aman'Thul, the High Father of the Titans, responded personally. Reaching down from the heavens with his own hand, Aman'Thul seized Y'Sharj and tore the old god from the surface of Azeroth. The High Father's grip crushed the seven-headed god, destroying it utterly in an instant. Y'Sharj, the mightiest of the old gods, was no more. The destruction of Y'Sharj was complete, but its consequences were catastrophic. The old god had embedded itself far deeper into Azeroth than the Titans had realized. Its roots and tendrils had grown down through the planet's crust over countless ages, intertwining with the very structure of the world. When Aman'Thul ripped Y'Sharj from the world, he left behind a massive wound in the planet's crust, a gaping hole from which the lifeblood of Azeroth itself began to hemorrhage. Arcane energy, the very essence of the world soul, poured forth from this wound in an uncontrollable torrent. The nascent Titan was bleeding out, its life force spilling into the world above. If the wound was not sealed, Azeroth's world soul would die, and with it all hope of producing a Titan capable of defeating the Void Lords. The very act meant to save the world soul had nearly destroyed it. The Titans realized immediately that they had made a terrible mistake. If they attempted to remove the remaining old gods in the same manner, they would likely destroy Azeroth entirely. The old gods had burrowed too deep, had embedded themselves too thoroughly in the planet's structure. They could not be excised without killing the patient. A new strategy was required. Rather than destroying the remaining old gods, the keepers were ordered to imprison them. C'Thun, Yogg-Saron, and N'Zoth were to be bound within the earth, their influence contained by powerful wards and magical barriers. It was not a perfect solution, for the old gods would continue to exist and would inevitably seek to escape their prisons. But it was the only option that would not result in Azeroth's destruction. The Keepers waged long and difficult battles to subdue each of the remaining old gods. C'Thun was driven into the depths beneath what would become the land of Silithus, its eye closing as Titan-forged wards wrapped around its form. Yogg-Saron unleashed its mightiest generals, the C'Thraxi, in a desperate attempt to prevent its imprisonment. These massive creatures fought with the fury of desperation, knowing that their master's defeat would mean their own end. But in the end, even these powerful beings fell before the might of the Titan forged, and Yogg-Saron was imprisoned beneath what would become Northrend. N'Zoth proved the most difficult to contain, its cunning allowing it to evade capture longer than its siblings, but eventually it too was imprisoned in the depths beneath the sea. One by one, C'Thun, Yogg-Saron, and N'Zoth were imprisoned within the depths of Azeroth, their influence bound by wards that would hopefully hold for eternity. Great facilities were constructed around their prisons, staffed by Titan-forged guardians, tasked with maintaining the wards and preventing any escape attempts. The old gods were not dead, but they were contained, their ability to corrupt the world souls severely limited. The prisons themselves were marvels of Titan engineering. Ahn'Qiraj, the temple city constructed above C'Thun's resting place, was sealed behind massive gates that could only be opened by ringing the scarab gong, a ritual requiring artifacts scattered across Azeroth. Ulduar, the facility built above Yogg-Saron's prison, was staffed by an entire hierarchy of Titan-forged watchers and guardians, each one bound to their duty for eternity. The prison of N'Zoth lay deep beneath the ocean floor, so remote and inaccessible that the Titans believed no one would ever find it. These prisons were designed to last forever. The wards that bound the old gods were powered by the same cosmic forces that the Titans themselves wielded. The guardians assigned to watch over them were immortal, tireless, incapable of being corrupted or turned from their duties. The Titans believed they had solved the problem of the old gods, had found a way to neutralize the threat without destroying Azeroth in the process. They were wrong. The old gods were patient beings, entities that measured time in eons rather than years. They could afford to wait. They could afford to probe their prisons for weaknesses, to whisper to any minds that came close enough to hear, to slowly corrupt the very guardians meant to contain them. The Titans had built prisons that could hold the old gods' bodies, but they had not found a way to imprison their influence, their whispers, their dreams. Over the millennia that followed, the old gods continued their work from within their prisons. They corrupted Keeper Loken, turning him against his fellow watchers and beginning a civil war among the Titan-forged. They whispered to the dragon aspect Neltharion, driving him to madness and transforming him into the monster Deathwing. They created the Emerald Nightmare, corrupting the realm of the green dragons and threatening all who slept upon Azeroth. The prisons held their bodies, but their influence spread nonetheless. The gaping wound left by Y'Shaarj's removal required immediate attention as well. The Keepers crafted magical wards around the massive crater, working desperately to staunch the flow of the world soul's lifeblood. Over time, the seeping energies calmed and settled into a great lake of pure arcane power. This lake would become known as the Well of Eternity, and its creation would have consequences that would echo through all of Azeroth's future history. The Black Empire was no more. For the first time in Azeroth's existence, a tentative peace settled over the world. The Keepers began the long process of ordering Azeroth, shaping its landscapes and preparing it for the emergence of mortal life. They carved mountains and filled valleys, created rivers and established forests, built the framework upon which future civilizations would rise. They created new races to help them in this work, beings who would tend the world and protect it from future threats. The Earthen were shaped from stone, sturdy and reliable workers who could reshape the land according to the Keeper's designs. The Vrikul were created as warriors, protectors who would guard the world against any threats that might arise. The mechagnomes were built to maintain the great machines that regulated Azeroth's systems, tireless workers who never needed rest. These Titan-forged would eventually evolve, changed by the curse of flesh that the old gods had woven into the world. The earthen would become dwarves, the Vrikul would give rise to humans, and many other races would emerge from the seeds the Keepers had planted. The mortal races of Azeroth, those beings who would one day stand against the greatest threats the cosmos could produce, had their origins in the work of the Keepers during this age of ordering. The Keepers established systems and safeguards to ensure that Azeroth would develop properly, that the world soul would continue its growth toward eventual awakening. Great facilities were built to maintain the world's systems, to regulate its weather patterns, to ensure that the planet remained healthy. Guardians were appointed to watch over specific aspects of the world, each one charged with ensuring that their domain remained stable and secure. But even as they worked, even as they built what they believed would be a lasting peace, the seeds of future conflict were already being sown. The old gods were not truly dead, merely imprisoned. Their whispers still reached out to those who would listen, and the Void Lords continued their eternal watch from beyond the borders of reality, patient as always, waiting for their next opportunity. They did not realize that the greatest threat posed by the Void Lords was not on Azeroth at all, but would instead come from an unlikely source, one of their own champions who had learned the truth about the Void and been driven to madness by it. While the Keepers worked to order Azeroth, another Titan was making a discovery that would change the course of cosmic history. Sargeras had long served as the champion of the Pantheon, their greatest warrior and defender. His duty was to protect the worlds the Pantheon ordered from the chaos of demons, those malevolent entities spawned from the energies of the twisting nether. The demons were creatures of pure chaos, beings that existed only to destroy and corrupt. They emerged from the twisting nether in endless numbers, driven by an instinctive hatred of order and stability. Left unchecked, they would consume world after world, undoing all the work the Pantheon had done to bring structure to the cosmos. Sargeras' task was to hunt these demons across the universe, destroying them wherever they threatened the ordered worlds. For countless eons, Sargeras performed this duty faithfully, battling demons wherever they threatened the ordered cosmos. He was magnificent in this role, a titan of incredible power and skill who never wavered in his dedication to the Pantheon's cause. Demons fled before him, their chaos no match for his ordered might. Worlds were saved by his intervention, their inhabitants never knowing how close they had come to destruction. But Sargeras' travels eventually led him to a world that would shatter his understanding of reality and push him toward a darkness from which he would never return. This was a planet whose surface was entirely shrouded in void energies, a world so completely corrupted that it seemed to radiate despair itself. Even from a distance, Sargeras could feel the wrongness of this place, the way reality itself seemed to twist and warp around its dark presence. Sargeras could sense a world soul within the planet, but its dreams had been twisted into horrific nightmares by the corruption that had taken root there. Where a healthy world soul would dream of light and order, this one dreamed only of darkness and destruction. The nascent titan within had been thoroughly corrupted, its developing consciousness twisted to serve the void. The titan investigated further, and what he discovered filled him with a dread he had never before experienced. This world was infested with old gods, eldritch horrors that had completely corrupted the nascent titan within. But more disturbing still was the presence of demons upon this world, specifically the Nathrazim, those cunning manipulators who had made themselves at home among the old gods' darkness. The Nathrazim were ancient beings, demons who had existed since the earliest days of the universe. They were masterful manipulators, capable of reading minds and exploiting weaknesses with uncanny precision. They served no master but their own advancement, allying themselves with whatever power seemed most likely to achieve their goals. That they had aligned themselves with the old gods on this corrupted world suggested that they saw potential in the void's cause. Sargeras captured several of the Nathrazim and subjected them to ruthless interrogation. What they revealed was a truth so terrible that it would haunt the Titan for all eternity. The Nathrazim spoke of the Void Lords, those cosmic entities of pure shadow who dwelt beyond the borders of reality. They explained the Void Lords' plan to corrupt world souls through their old god creations, to produce a dark titan that would be utterly devoted to the Void's cause. The implications of this revelation were staggering. If the Void Lords succeeded in corrupting even a single world soul to completion, the resulting Dark Titan would be a being of cosmic power completely enslaved to the void. Such a creature would be able to move freely through the physical universe, bringing void corruption wherever it went. Not even the Pantheon could stand against one of their own kind twisted to serve such darkness. The entire cosmos would fall to the void. Sargeras tried to imagine what a dark titan would be capable of. It would possess all the power of a normal titan, that godlike ability to reshape worlds and command cosmic forces. But instead of using that power to bring order and stability, it would spread chaos and corruption. It would tear apart the worlds the Pantheon had ordered, corrupt the life forms they had nurtured, and ultimately drag all of existence into the shadow of the void. Sargeras was filled with rage and despair in equal measure. The threat posed by the Void Lords was greater than anything he had ever faced, greater even than the endless legions of demons he had spent eons fighting. In his anguish, Sargeras made a decision that would have consequences beyond anything he could imagine. He cleaved the corrupted world in two with his great blade, instantly killing the nascent titan within and ensuring that it could never awaken as a dark titan. The world died in an instant, split apart by a blow that would have shattered lesser planets into dust. The world soul within, corrupted beyond salvation, was destroyed before it could awaken. Sargeras felt the death of the nascent titan, sensed its corrupted consciousness, snuffed out by his blade. It was a mercy, he told himself, better death than an eternity of servitude to the void. Immediately after this act, Sargeras returned to the Pantheon to share what he had learned. He told them of the Void Lords, of the old gods, of the existential threat posed by the potential creation of a dark titan. He expected the other titans to share his horror, to understand the desperate measures that were needed to prevent such a catastrophe. But the Pantheon did not react as Sargeras had hoped. They were troubled by his discovery, certainly, but they were more troubled by his response to it. Why had he destroyed the corrupted world soul rather than attempting to save it? Could not the corruption have been purged, the nascent titan rescued from the void's influence? The keepers on Azeroth had managed to imprison the old gods without destroying the world soul there. Why had Sargeras not attempted something similar? The Titan champion tried to explain his reasoning. The world soul had been completely corrupted beyond any hope of salvation. He had looked into its dreams and seen nothing but void and darkness, no trace of the being of order it should have been. The only way to prevent it from becoming a dark titan was to destroy it entirely. But even as he spoke these words, Sargeras felt doubt creeping into his heart. Had he made the right choice? Could the world soul have been saved? The Pantheon's questions planted seeds of uncertainty that would grow into something far darker in the ages to come. More importantly, Sargeras began to question whether the Pantheon truly understood the scope of the threat they faced. The Void Lords had sent old gods to countless worlds throughout the universe. How many world souls might already be corrupted beyond salvation? How many dark titans might be on the verge of awakening? The Pantheon's approach of carefully ordering individual worlds seemed hopelessly inadequate against such a cosmic threat. Sargeras withdrew from the Pantheon, his mind churning with dark thoughts. He continued to hunt demons, but his heart was no longer in the work. He kept thinking about the Void Lords, about the old gods, about the inevitable moment when a dark titan would arise and consume all of existence. The Pantheon's methods could not prevent this. They were treating symptoms while ignoring the disease. In the depths of his despair, Sargeras conceived of a solution so terrible that it would have horrified his former self. His mind, once the pinnacle of Titan nobility and dedication, had been broken by the weight of what he had learned. The revelation of the Void Lord's plan, the certainty that they would eventually succeed, the knowledge that nothing he had done or could do would be enough to stop them. He began to see corruption everywhere. Every world he visited, every civilization he encountered, every living being he met was a potential vessel for void corruption. The shadows seemed darker than they had before. The whispers of the void, which he had once been immune to, now seemed to follow him wherever he went. He could not sleep without dreaming of dark titans, could not wake without wondering which worlds had fallen to the shadow while he rested. If the Void Lords could only corrupt life, if they could only use living worlds and living beings as vessels for their influence, then the answer was obvious. Remove all life from the universe, and the Void Lords would have nothing left to corrupt. Burn away every living thing, scatter the ashes across the cosmos, and the Shadow's plans would be forever frustrated. A cosmos reduced to lifeless matter and empty void would be immune to the Void Lord's schemes. To Sargeras's twisted logic, a dead universe was preferable to one consumed by the void. In his mind, if life had emerged once in the cosmos, perhaps it could emerge again after the threat of the Void Lords had passed. But if a dark titan arose and the void consumed all of reality, there would be no second chances, no possibility of renewal. Complete annihilation was better than eternal corruption. This was the terrible conclusion that led Sargeras to abandon the Pantheon and form the Burning Legion. He gathered the demons he had spent eons fighting and transformed them into an army of destruction. He recruited or created countless beings to serve his cause, from the Eridar warlocks who would become his lieutenants to the countless lesser demons who would form the bulk of his forces. His crusade would spare nothing and no one, for in his mind, everything in the universe had to be destroyed to prevent the Void Lords from achieving their ultimate goal. The irony was profound. In trying to prevent the Void Lords' victory, Sargeras had become almost as great a threat to existence as the Void Lords themselves. The Burning Crusade would sweep across the cosmos, destroying world after world, life form after life form. And yet, for all his destruction, Sargeras never lost sight of his original purpose. He was not burning the universe out of malice or cruelty. He truly believed he was saving existence from a fate worse than death. The Void Lords had achieved something remarkable, though they may not have intended it. Their very existence, the revelation of their plans, had broken the mightiest champion of the Pantheon. They had created two existential threats to the cosmos instead of one, and as the Burning Legion began its terrible crusade, the imprisoned old gods on Azeroth continued their patient work of corruption, reaching out with whispers and dreams to any minds they could touch, never ceasing in their efforts to fulfill the purpose for which the Void Lords had created them. While the events that would shape the cosmos unfolded across the great dark beyond, another story was playing out on a distant world called Karish. This was the homeworld of a race known as the Karishi, a sophisticated civilization that had developed advanced magical technology. They lived under two bright suns, building great cities and advancing their understanding of arcane energy. For countless ages, they knew nothing of the void or the horrors that lurked beyond the borders of reality. Karish was a world of wonders. The Karishi had developed a profound understanding of how energy could be manipulated and transformed. Their cities were marvels of magical engineering, towers of crystalline beauty that channeled arcane power for 1,000 different purposes. They had harnessed the energy of their twin suns, developed ways to transmute matter, and achieved a level of technological sophistication that rivaled any civilization in the cosmos. The Karishi themselves were beings of great intelligence and curiosity. They were not warriors by nature, preferring to solve problems through thought and innovation rather than violence. Their society valued knowledge above all else, and their scholars were constantly pushing the boundaries of what magic could achieve. They believed they had mastered the secrets of the universe, that their understanding of energy and matter made them secure against any threat. That ignorance ended when Dimensius the All-Devouring found their world. Dimensius was a Void Lord, one of those terrible entities of pure shadow that ruled the void. How he discovered Karish is still debated among the survivors of that world, but the effects of his coming were unmistakable and catastrophic. Dimensius was drawn to Karish by the world's world soul, that nascent titan slumbering within the planet's core. Like the old gods on Azeroth, Dimensius saw an opportunity to corrupt a world soul for the glory of the void. But unlike the old gods, who were creations of the Void Lords sent blindly into the cosmos, Dimensius was a Void Lord himself, a being of far greater power and intelligence. Dimensius opened countless gateways into the void around the planet, creating portals through which dark energies poured into Karish's reality. The twin suns that had warmed the world for so long began to darken as void energy suffused the atmosphere. Shadow spread across the land, and with it came creatures of nightmare, void beings that served Dimensius in his hunger to consume the world. The Karashi watched in horror as their perfect world began to fall apart around them. Their cities, once brilliant with arcane light, now stood under darkened skies, where stars that had shone for millions of years were being snuffed out one by one. The shadow spread inexorably, consuming everything it touched, transforming vibrant landscapes into wastelands of darkness and despair. The Ka'arashi were not helpless in the face of this assault. They possessed advanced magical knowledge, and among them were brilliant minds who understood how to manipulate energy in ways few other civilizations had mastered. The most brilliant of these was a noble technomancer who would later be known only as Locust Walker. He was the leader of a secret organization called the Revel, composed of the greatest minds in Karish who dedicated themselves to finding a way to save their world. Locust Walker was a Kareshi unlike any other. Where his peers saw the void as simply an enemy to be destroyed, he saw it as a force to be understood. He believed that true mastery came not from avoiding the shadow, but from understanding it, from learning its nature so thoroughly that it could be turned to his own purposes. This philosophy would eventually make him one of the few beings in the cosmos capable of wielding void power without being corrupted by it. Locust Walker and his colleagues developed a desperate plan. They created magical barriers around their cities, shields powered by devices called the Reshi ribbons. These remarkable inventions could convert all forms of energy, including the void itself, into arcane power. Behind these barriers, the Karashi would be protected from the dark energies that Dimensius was pouring into their world. The barriers worked, but they came with an unforeseen cost. While the shields blocked the direct corrupting influence of the void, the prolonged exposure to the arcane energy they generated had a strange effect on the Karashi themselves. Their corporeal forms began to break down, their physical shells dissolving as their souls became infused with pure energy. The Karashi were being transformed into something new, something that was no longer truly flesh and blood. In the end, the Ka'arashi emerged from this transformation as ethereals, beings of pure energy held together by magical wrappings of their own invention. Their physical bodies were gone, replaced by swirling patterns of arcane force. To prevent their energy forms from dissipating, Locust Walker invented magical wrappings that could contain and shape their new bodies. These wrappings became essential to ethereal survival, allowing them to maintain coherent forms in a universe that no longer recognized them as solid beings. This altered state proved to be an unexpected blessing, for their enhanced minds and magical abilities allowed them to fight Dimensius and his forces to a standstill. The ethereals could perceive energy in ways their flesh and blood forms never could. They could manipulate arcane power with unprecedented precision, and they were no longer bound by the limitations of physical bodies, able to survive in environments that would have killed their former selves instantly. But a standstill was not victory, and Dimensius continued his assault on Karish. The Void Lord was patient, for such beings think in terms of eons rather than years. He would eventually consume the world, feeding on its matter and energy, claiming its world soul for the void. The ethereals could resist, but they could not defeat him. It was during this time that Dimensius was served by a harbinger, a being who went before him to prepare worlds for his coming. This harbinger was Xal'atath, that ancient entity whose consciousness had once been bound within a dark blade. How Xal'atath came to serve Dimensius is unclear, but she played a crucial role in the events that would follow. Her presence added another layer of complexity to the desperate situation, for Xal'atath was a being of cunning and manipulation whose true loyalties were always uncertain. Locust Walker, Xal'atath, and another Karishi named Naru eventually came to a terrible realization. Karish could not be saved. Dimensius would eventually break through their defenses and consume the world soul within. The only question was whether they could deny him his prize, whether they could destroy the world before Dimensius could claim it. The decision they made was born of desperation. Rather than allow Dimensius to consume Karesh's world soul, they chose to destroy the planet themselves. The reveal triggered the destruction of their own homeworld, shattering Karesh in a cataclysmic explosion that they hoped would also destroy the Void Lord who had brought such devastation upon them. Karesh was no more. The planet that had been home to a thriving civilization was reduced to a husk surrounded by shattered remnants. The ethereals were scattered across the cosmos, fragments of a people who had lost everything to the void. Many ended up in the twisting nether, that chaotic realm between worlds, where they would eventually establish new societies. Others found their way to other dimensions entirely, including the realm of death known as the Shadowlands. The ethereals would eventually split into various factions with different philosophies and goals. Some became merchants, using their understanding of energy to facilitate trade across dimensions. These were the brokers, pragmatic beings who valued profit above ideology. Others dedicated themselves to hunting void creatures, forming organizations like the Protectorate that actively worked to oppose the spread of shadow. Still others fell to the void's influence, becoming void ethereals who served the very force that had destroyed their world. As for Dimensius, the destruction of Karesh did not kill him outright. He was a Void Lord, a being of shadow energy that could not be easily destroyed within the physical universe. But the cataclysm did succeed in fragmenting him, scattering pieces of his essence across the cosmos. These fragments were considerably weaker than the original whole, mere shadows of the terrible power Dimensius had once possessed. The fate of the surviving ethereals was varied and often tragic. Many died in the destruction of their world, their energy forms dissipating as the barriers that protected them collapsed. Others found themselves adrift in the twisting nether, that chaotic realm between dimensions, struggling to survive in an environment that constantly threatened to tear them apart. Those who survived eventually found their way to other worlds, other realms, other dimensions. Some retained their dedication to opposing the void, never forgetting what had been taken from them, never ceasing in their efforts to prevent other civilizations from suffering Kaarish's fate. These formed organizations like the Protectorate and dedicated their existence to hunting void creatures wherever they appeared. Others became disillusioned, their faith in any cause broken by the loss of everything they had known. These ethereals turned to commerce and trade, using their unique abilities to manipulate energy to become merchants and brokers operating across dimensions. They no longer fought for ideals. They fought only for themselves, accumulating wealth and power as shields against a universe that had proven itself capable of taking everything without warning. And some fell to the very darkness that had destroyed their world. These void ethereals had been exposed to void energy for so long that it had seeped into their very essence, corrupting them from the inside. They now served the shadow willingly, some out of a twisted belief that the void's victory was inevitable and survival lay only in serving it, others because their minds had been broken and they no longer remembered what they had once been. The destruction of Karish became a legend among the ethereals, a story passed down through generations of a paradise lost to the shadow. Different factions interpreted the legend differently, some using it to justify their continued war against the void, others using it to justify their withdrawal from all cosmic conflicts. But all remembered and all mourned what had been taken from them. One such fragment appeared during the invasion of Outland by the forces of the Burning Legion. This weakened manifestation of Dimensius was encountered by ethereals of the Protectorate, a faction dedicated to hunting down and destroying void threats. With the aid of adventurers from Azeroth, this fragment was defeated at Maniforge Ultras in Netherstorm, apparently ending the immediate threat. But the story of Dimensius was not truly over. The various fragments of his essence continued to exist, scattered across the cosmos, waiting to be reunited. Organizations dedicated to the void, such as the Shadow Guard, sought to gather these fragments and restore Dimensius to his full power. In the realm of Kairish's remains, the war between those who served the void and those who opposed it continued, a conflict that would eventually draw in heroes from Azeroth once again. According to statements from Blizzard's creative leadership, Dimensius was described as the last Void Lord, though the exact meaning of this statement remains subject to interpretation. Whether it means he is the last Void Lord to manifest in the physical universe, or whether other Void Lords have been destroyed or imprisoned, is unclear. What is certain is that Dimensius represents the most direct appearance of a Void Lord that the mortal races have ever encountered, and his power, even in fragmented form, was terrifying to behold. The Void Lords themselves may rarely manifest in the physical universe, but their influence extends through countless lesser beings who serve their dark purposes. These servants range from mindless collections of shadow energy to beings of terrible intelligence and power. Some serve the void knowingly, having pledged themselves to darkness in exchange for power, or simply because they have been corrupted beyond redemption. Others serve unknowingly, their minds twisted by whispers they do not even realize they are hearing, their actions guided by influences they cannot perceive. Understanding these servants of the void is essential to grasping the full scope of the shadow's threat to existence. The void does not rely solely on great cosmic forces like the old gods. It works through countless smaller agents, each one spreading corruption in their own way, each one weakening the barriers between the physical universe and the endless darkness beyond. The hierarchy of void creatures is vast and complex, ranging from mindless entities of pure shadow to beings of vast intelligence and power. At the lowest levels are creatures that are barely more than animated shadow, collections of void energy given temporary form. At the highest levels are entities that could challenge gods, beings whose power and cunning make them threats to entire worlds. Each type of void creature serves a specific purpose in the void's endless war against existence, and together they form an army that threatens all of creation. Some void creatures emerge spontaneously wherever void energy concentrates. Rifts in reality, places where the barriers between dimensions have grown thin, naturally spawn these entities. Other void creatures are deliberately created by the Void Lords or their most powerful servants, shaped for specific purposes and imbued with the abilities needed to accomplish their assigned tasks. Still others were once mortal beings who were exposed to void energy and transformed, their original forms corrupted into something dark and terrible. The most commonly encountered void creatures are the Void Walkers, beings of shadow energy that can be summoned and bound by those who practice void magic. These entities appear as humanoid shapes composed of swirling darkness, their forms constantly shifting and rippling as if made of living shadow. While individually not overwhelmingly powerful, Void Walkers are numerous and can be found wherever the Void's influence has taken root. Void Walkers are often the first void creatures that mortal mages encounter. They can be summoned through relatively simple rituals, bound to serve a master's will through magical chains. Warlocks in particular have learned to summon and control Void Walkers, using them as servants and warriors. But such bindings are never truly secure. A Void Walker always seeks to corrupt its master, whispering in dreams, gradually eroding the summoner's will until they become another servant of the shadow. More dangerous are the Void Lords, not to be confused with the cosmic Void Lords who created the Old Gods. These Void Lords are large, heavily armored beings of concentrated shadow energy, far more powerful than common Void Walkers. They serve as enforcers and commanders among Void forces, their presence indicating a significant concentration of shadow power. A Void Lord's armor is not separate from its body, but an integral part of its being, shadow energy compressed into a form that resembles physical protection. These beings are nearly impossible to bind through normal means, their wills too strong to be chained by mortal magic. When a Void Lord appears, it usually indicates that the Void has taken serious interest in a location or event. Void Callers are another variety of void creature, typically draped in tattered cloth and carrying lanterns that seem to burn with shadow rather than light. These lanterns can bridge reality, opening portals through which other void beings can emerge. Where Void Callers appear, larger incursions of void forces often follow. The lanterns carried by Void Callers are objects of terrible power. They contain fragments of the void itself, pockets of shadow energy that exist partially outside normal reality. By manipulating these lanterns, Void Callers can tear holes in the fabric of existence, creating doorways through which void forces can pour into the physical universe. A single Void Caller can turn a minor incursion into a full-scale invasion. Void Revenants are particularly dangerous entities, parasitic beings that tear holes through the planes of existence. They can move between dimensions with unsettling ease, appearing and disappearing as they hunt for prey to consume. Their ability to phase through reality makes them difficult to track or trap. Unlike most void creatures, Void Revenants do not simply serve the void's purposes through corruption or destruction. They actively feed on the dimensional barriers that separate different planes of existence. Each time a Void Revenant phases between dimensions. It weakens the barriers just a little more, making future incursions easier. Over time, their feeding can create permanent rifts between the physical universe and the void. Beyond these more common servants, the void has corrupted countless other beings throughout the cosmos. Void hounds prowl as predators of shadow, hunting those who oppose the void's spread. These creatures appear as canine shapes made of darkness, but their hunting instincts are far more sophisticated than any mortal animal. They can track prey across dimensions, following the psychic scent of those who have been marked for destruction. Void dragons twist the majesty of dragonkind into something terrible and corrupt. These creatures were once noble dragons who were exposed to concentrated void energy and transformed. Their scales turn black and translucent, their eyes burn with shadow instead of elemental fire, and their minds become twisted toward destruction and despair. The most famous void dragon is Ultraxion, created by Deathwing as part of the Hour of Twilight. Void wraiths drift through reality as spirits of pure malevolence, seeking to drain the life from anything they encounter. These creatures may be the remnants of beings who were completely consumed by the void, their original forms dissolved while their consciousness lingers as a shadow of pure hunger. They cannot be reasoned with or bargained with. They exist only to feed. Among the most intelligent and powerful of the void's servants are the Dominar, beings whose might rivals that of the most formidable creatures in the universe. These entities represent the pinnacle of void evolution among non-void lord beings, commanders, and strategists who direct the void's forces in their endless war against reality. The Dominar are cunning and patient, capable of plans that span millennia. But perhaps the most tragic of all void servants are the void gods, beings that were once Naru, those entities of pure light who dedicated themselves to nurturing life and hope. The Naru exist in a cycle of light and void, their nature shifting between these two states over vast periods of time. When a Naru enters its void state, it becomes a darkened creature that feeds on the spirits of the dead, a twisted reflection of the being of hope it once was. The Naru cycle is one of the great mysteries of the cosmos. These beings of pure light do not remain in that state forever. Over thousands of years, their radiance slowly dims, and they begin to transform into creatures of shadow. This darkened state can last for thousands of years more, during which the former Naru feeds on souls to sustain itself. Eventually, if the Naru survives, it will begin to regenerate, slowly returning to its state of light. In extremely rare cases, this transformation can produce a void god, a being of tremendous power that is capable of destroying entire planets. These fallen Naru represent one of the great tragedies of existence, beings that were once devoted to life and light, now serving as instruments of shadow and destruction. The most notable examples of fallen Naru include Kara, the dark star that was worshipped by the Shadow Moon clan on alternate Draenor. Kara had fallen into a void state and crashed onto Draenor, where the orcs mistook it for a deity. Under Kara's influence, the Shadow Moon became practitioners of shadow magic, drawing on the fallen Naru's power for their dark rituals. Eventually, the alternate version of Velen sacrificed his own life to purify Kara and return it to the light. Muru was another tragic fallen Naru, one who was captured by the Blood Elves and taken to Silvermoon City. The Blood Elves, desperate for magical power after the destruction of the Sunwell, drained Muru of its light to fuel their addiction. Over time, this draining pushed Muru into a void state, transforming it into the void creature Entropius. When adventurers confronted Entropius in the Sunwell Plateau, they were essentially fighting the corrupted remains of a being that had once been devoted to hope and healing. Kuyur, trapped beneath Nagrand, was corrupted by the ogre Cho'Gall and transformed into the void god Decimatus. Kuyur had been one of the Naru who brought the Draenei to Draenor, a being of compassion and wisdom. But after being wounded and left behind, Kuyur fell into a void state, becoming vulnerable to Cho'Gall's manipulations. The creation of Decimatus showed how even the most holy beings could be twisted to serve the void. Each of these beings had once been a creature of light, devoted to protecting and nurturing life. Their falls into shadow demonstrate how the void can corrupt even the most holy of beings. No one is truly safe from the shadow's influence. The ethereals, those beings transformed by the destruction of Karish, present a more complex relationship with the void. Most ethereals maintain their sanity and free will, using their understanding of energy to resist the void's corrupting influence. But some have fallen to the shadow, becoming void ethereals who hear the maddening whispers of the void and do its bidding. These corrupted ethereals are recognizable by their darker, more shadowy appearance and their devotion to spreading the void's influence. Among the ethereals, the Shadow Guard stands out as a faction entirely devoted to the void's cause. These ethereals actively work to advance the Void Lords' agenda, gathering fragments of Dimensius, corrupting other beings, and generally spreading shadow wherever they can. Their opposition to groups like the Protectorate and the various ethereal cartels represents an ongoing conflict within ethereal society itself. All of these beings, from the lowliest Voidwalker to the mightiest Void God, ultimately serve the purposes of the Void Lords, whether they know it or not. Every act of corruption, every spread of shadow, every life consumed by the void brings the cosmos one step closer to the ultimate goal of the Void Lords: the complete consumption of reality itself, the transformation of all existence into endless shadow. Among all the servants of the void, none has proven as cunning, as patient, or as central to the shadow's machinations as Xal'atath. Her story spans from the dawn of Azeroth's history to the present day, weaving through some of the most significant events in the world's troubled existence. She is the thread that connects countless moments of darkness, the puppeteer whose strings have been pulled by no one but herself. To understand Xal'atath is to understand what the void could achieve if it possessed true patience and intelligence. The old gods were powerful, but they were also predictable. Their corruption was obvious, their methods direct. They built empires of nightmare that drew attention and opposition. They could be identified and eventually defeated. Xal'atath is different. She works through manipulation rather than brute force. She corrupts through whispers and temptation rather than obvious madness. She plants seeds that may take centuries to bear fruit, and she is patient enough to wait for them. Where the old gods were hammers, Xal'atath is a blade, precise and deadly and impossible to track until it is too late. She has survived for longer than any other servant of the void on Azeroth. The old gods are dead or imprisoned. The Black Empire is dust. Countless cultists and champions of shadow have risen and fallen over the millennia. But Xal'atath endures, adapting to each new age, finding new pawns to manipulate, advancing her mysterious agenda one careful step at a time. Xal'atath's origins remain shrouded in mystery, with multiple theories attempting to explain where she came from. Some believe she was once a fifth old god, one that existed during the primordial age of the Black Empire alongside Y'Sharj, S'thun, Yogg-Saron, and N'Zoth. According to this theory, the other old gods eventually turned on her, ganging up to consume her essence and absorb her power. If true, this would explain both her ancient nature and her apparent independence from the surviving old gods. The evidence for this theory comes from various sources. Xal'atath herself has made cryptic references to being consumed by her siblings to a time when she was more than she is now. The faceless ones who served the old gods speak of a fifth power that was destroyed during the age of the Black Empire. And Xal'atath's knowledge of the old god's secrets seems to come from personal experience rather than mere observation. Other accounts suggest she was never a true old god at all, but rather was created from the claw of Y'Sharj during the height of the Black Empire. This would make her a fragment of the most powerful old god, a shard of that seven-headed horror that was torn from Azeroth by Aman'Thul himself. Whatever her true origin, Xal'atath clearly dates back to the earliest era of void influence on Azeroth. This theory is supported by the fact that the Blade of the Black Empire, the weapon that would house Xal'atath's consciousness for millennia, is described as being made from the claw of an old god. If Xal'atath was created from Y'Sharj's essence, it would explain her tremendous power as well as her unique nature. She would be neither fully old god nor entirely something else, but a new kind of being born from the most powerful of the Shadow's servants. For most of recorded history, Xal'atath's consciousness was bound within a dark dagger known as the Blade of the Black Empire. This terrible weapon was used by dark priests for ritual sacrifices during the height of the Black Empire, its void-forged metal drinking deep of blood and life energy. The blade was more than a weapon. It was a prison and a vehicle, a way for Xal'atath to survive the destruction of the Black Empire while remaining active in the world. After the fall of the old gods and the end of the Black Empire, the blade passed through many hands, each wielder eventually succumbing to its corrupting whispers. Xal'atath would speak to those who carried her, offering power and knowledge in exchange for service. She would promise whatever her wielder most desired, and she was patient enough to wait for the corruption to take hold. The blade's history reads like a catalogue of tragedy and horror. The troll witch doctor Xando discovered the weapon after being ousted from his society. The blade's whispers fed his rage and led him to a forbidden mound of black stones in the mountains, which turned out to be the slumbering form of Kithix, an old god general. Xando sacrificed his companions to revive the aberration, only to be destroyed by Kithix himself, who claimed the blade as his own. Across the ages, the blade of the Black Empire surfaced again and again, invariably associated with some horrific ritual or disaster. Kingdoms fell because their rulers fell under the blade's influence. Cults formed around those who wielded it, gathering worshippers who would eventually be sacrificed to feed the blade's hunger. Each appearance left a trail of death and madness in its wake. During the First War, Orc warlocks used the blade in their dark rituals, drawing on its power to fuel their fell magic. After the war, the human bishop Natalie Celine studied the blade's power, originally intending to destroy it. But Xal'atath's whispers convinced her to study it instead, to try to understand it before destroying it. Through the blade's influence, Celine learned of the void and its relationship to the light. She developed the ability to wield shadow magic and taught others to do the same, using these powers in secret during the Second War. But the blade's whispers continued to corrupt her and her followers, until they eventually murdered Celine in her sleep and claimed the blade for themselves. Thus was born the tradition of shadow priests, mortal wielders of void magic, who walk a dangerous line between power and madness. The irony is profound. The very magic that shadow priests use to serve the light's cause was born from the teachings of a void entity, passed down through a chain of corruption and murder. Every shadow priest who channels the void does so using techniques that Xal'atath herself developed, drawing on power that ultimately serves the Void Lord's purposes. During the third invasion of the Burning Legion, shadow priests wielded the blade of the Black Empire as one of their artifact weapons, and Xal'atath spoke to them directly. She commented on locations they visited, offered cryptic insights into history and lore, and generally demonstrated a vast knowledge accumulated over countless millennia. She also revealed something crucial about her nature. She was not merely a weapon, but a conscious entity, trapped within the blade and yearning for freedom. The whispers Xal'atath offered to shadow priests were both seductive and disturbing. She spoke of secrets that no mortal should know, of events that happened before the world was ordered, of the true nature of reality and the forces that shaped it. Those who listened too closely risked their sanity, but those who maintained their discipline gained insights that made them more powerful wielders of shadow magic. That freedom came through an unlikely alliance with Xal'atath, the old god who had been imprisoned beneath the seas of Azeroth. During the conflict at the Crucible of Storms, Xal'atath offered Xal'atath a deal. She would deliver powerful artifacts and even a mortal champion to the old god. In exchange, Xal'atath would sever her essence from the blade of the Black Empire, freeing her from her millennia-long prison. Xal'atath accepted the bargain, and Xal'atath walked free for the first time in ages beyond counting. She emerged in a physical form, a body that some believe was created specifically for her, while others suggest was taken from a mortal victim. Regardless of its origin, this form allowed Xal'atath to act directly in the world for the first time since before the ordering of Azeroth. But she did not remain to serve Xal'atath. Instead, she stepped through a portal to forge her own destiny, disappearing from the awareness of mortal and immortal beings alike. This betrayal of Xal'atath immediately after receiving what she wanted demonstrated Xal'atath's true nature. She serves no master but herself, allying with others only when it advances her own goals. What Xal'atath did during her absence from the affairs of Azeroth has since become clearer. She had served as the harbinger of Dimensius during his assault on Karish, playing a crucial role in the devastation of that world. When Locust Walker, Naru, and Xal'atath herself chose to destroy Karish, rather than let Dimensius consume its world soul, Xal'atath had been instrumental in that terrible decision. Now, Freed from her blade prison, and apparently having betrayed or overcome Dimensius, Xal'atath has emerged as a major threat in her own right. She calls herself the Harbinger of the Void, claiming that a new era of shadow is about to dawn. The Black Empire may have fallen, and the old gods may be dead, but Xal'atath intends to raise a new dark legacy, one that has learned from the mistakes of the past. What makes Xal'atath different from previous Void threats is her understanding of where the old gods went wrong. They were too obvious, too direct in their corruption. They built empires of nightmare that drew the Titans' attention. They corrupted so thoroughly that the threat they posed became unmistakable. Xal'atath intends to be more subtle, to spread her influence through manipulation and deception rather than brute force. She has studied the mortal races of Azeroth for millennia, has learned their weaknesses and their strengths. She knows that they are capable of defeating even the greatest threats when they unite against them, so she will not give them a clear enemy to unite against. She will work through proxies and pawns, through corruption that spreads slowly, through whispers that seem harmless until it is too late. The destruction of Dalaran demonstrated her growing power and willingness to strike openly when it serves her purposes. The floating city of mages, one of the most powerful bastions of magical knowledge in Azeroth, was destroyed in a devastating assault. Khadgar, one of the most powerful mages in Azeroth's history, fell opposing her. This attack showed that Xal'atath was no longer content to work solely in shadows. When she chose to strike openly, even the mightiest defenses could not stop her. Her current machinations center on Azeroth, specifically on the Narubian kingdom of Xal'atath, deep beneath the world's surface. The Narubians are descendants of the ancient Akir, those insectoid creatures that arose from the old gods during the age of the Black Empire. Though the Narubians have long since separated from their old god origins, developing their own civilization and culture, they retain a connection to the darkness that spawned them. Xal'atath has corrupted Queen Ansurek, ruler of Xal'atath, convincing the Narubian monarch to betray and murder her own mother to seize power. In exchange for loyalty to the Harbinger, Xal'atath has granted the Narubians the means of a dark evolution, transforming them into new and terrible soldiers for the Void's cause. These mutated Narubians are stronger, fiercer, and utterly devoted to their new mistress. The assault on Azeroth from within has begun, and at its heart stands Xal'atath, the patient, the cunning, the eternal. She has waited for ages beyond counting, passed through countless, hands whispered to innumerable minds. Now finally free and in possession of power she has never before wielded, she moves to complete the work that the old gods began so long ago. While Xal'atath represents the active, aggressive face of void corruption in the current age, others have approached the power of shadow in different ways. These are the mortals and ethereals who have sought to wield void energy without being consumed by it, walking a razor's edge between power and madness. The most prominent of these void wielders is Alleria Windrunner, a hero whose story spans centuries and dimensions. Alleria was once a ranger captain of Silvermoon, a high elf warrior who fought against the Orcish horde during the Second War. She was known for her skill with the bow, her fierce dedication to her homeland, and her passionate nature that sometimes led her into conflict with authority. Alongside her lover, Turalyon, She joined the Alliance expedition that pursued the Horde through the Dark Portal to Draenor. This expedition was meant to prevent the Orcs from invading Azeroth again, but it became something far more when the Orc warlock Ner'zhul tore Draenor apart with multiple portals. The planet shattered, becoming the broken realm known as Outland. When that world was torn apart, Illyria and Turalyon were believed lost, presumed dead for years. Their names became legends in the Alliance, heroes who had sacrificed everything to protect their world. Statues were erected in their honor, songs were sung about their courage, but the truth of their fate was far stranger than anyone imagined. The truth was far stranger. Illyria and Turalyon had been pulled into the twisting nether, where they joined the Army of the Light, a faction of beings dedicated to fighting the Burning Legion across the cosmos. The Army of the Light was led by the Naru, those beings of pure radiance who had dedicated themselves to opposing the darkness wherever it spread. Illyria and Turalyon became two of their greatest champions. Due to the strange nature of time within the Nether, 1,000 years passed for Illyria and Turalyon, while only decades elapsed on Azeroth. They experienced centuries of warfare against the Legion, saw countless worlds fall to demonic invasion, and fought battles that would fill libraries if properly recorded. They grew older, wiser, and more powerful, but they never forgot the home they had left behind. During her time with the Army of the Light, Illyria was attacked on a Legion prison world saturated with void energy. This world had been deliberately corrupted by the Legion, used as a place to contain beings too dangerous to simply destroy. The void energy there was concentrated and malevolent, and it found its way into Illyria during her captivity. The shadow infected her, leaving traces of the void within her being. She could feel it inside her, a cold presence that whispered to her in dreams, that offered power if she would only listen. Most who experienced such corruption would flee from it, would seek purification, or simply succumb to despair. But Illyria was not most beings. Rather than fighting against this corruption, Illyria became fascinated by it. She saw in the void a potential weapon against the Legion, a power that could be turned against her enemies. If the shadow could corrupt demons, why could it not be used to destroy them? If the void was the enemy of all existence, then surely it was the enemy of the Legion as well. Her interest in void magic brought her into conflict with Sarah, the prime Naru who led the Army of the Light. The Naru strictly forbade Illyria from pursuing the path of shadow, warning that it would lead only to corruption and madness. Zera had seen what happened to those who tried to wield the void. They all fell eventually. The shadow was patient. It could wait forever. But Illyria heard of a mysterious ethereal who had mastered the void without succumbing to its whispers, and she was determined to learn from him. If it was possible to wield the shadow without being consumed, then she would find out how. This ethereal was Locust Walker, the same being who had led the Revel on Kairish and helped destroy his own world to deny it to Dimensius. After the fall of Kairish, Locust Walker had become an outcast, pursued by numerous enemies, including the Burning Legion. Despite wielding tremendous void power, he remained free of the void's corrupting influence, a feat that should have been impossible. Locust Walker had achieved something that most scholars believed could not be done. He had looked into the heart of the void, understood its nature, and emerged uncorrupted. He had learned to use shadow energy without letting it consume him, to listen to the whispers without being driven mad. His secret was discipline, an iron will that never wavered, and a deep understanding of what the void truly was. Illyria eventually encountered Locust Walker while both were imprisoned by the Legion on a world called Niskara. Together they escaped, their complementary skills allowing them to overcome obstacles that neither could have faced alone, and Locust Walker agreed to teach Illyria the ways of the void. In a plane of pure shadow, the ethereal instructed her in the nature of the void, its workings, and its place in the cosmic order. The training was brutal, pushing Illyria to the very limits of her mental and spiritual endurance. She had to confront the darkest parts of herself, the fears and doubts that the void would exploit, the weaknesses that could become doorways for corruption. Locust Walker was not a gentle teacher. He understood that the stakes were too high for kindness. If Illyria was going to survive as a wielder of void power, she needed to be absolutely certain of her own strength, absolutely confident in her ability to resist the shadow's whispers. Any doubt, any hesitation could prove fatal. The ethereal showed her visions of what happened to those who failed, beings who had tried to wield the void and been consumed by it, their minds shattered, their bodies transformed into twisted mockeries of what they had once been. He made her understand that this was not a path for the weak or the uncertain. Every moment of every day would be a battle against the darkness, and there could be no rest, no respite, no moment when she could let her guard down. Most importantly, he taught her the discipline required to wield void power without losing herself to madness. He emphasized that control and sanity were essential when dealing with the void. The shadow whispered constantly, seeking to corrupt and consume. It would never stop. It would never give up. The only defense was eternal vigilance, a will strong enough to resist, no matter how seductive the whispers became. Only by maintaining absolute mental discipline could a wielder use the void's power without being consumed by it. He spoke at length of the duality of light and shadow, how each needed the other to exist, and how a true master could walk between both without being claimed by either. The transformation of Illyria was completed on Argus, the homeworld of the Eridar that had been consumed by the Burning Legion. There, Illyria encountered Lura, a Naru that had fallen into a void state and become a creature of shadow. When Lura was slain, Illyria seized the moment and absorbed the void energy the fallen Naru released. The power that flowed into her was tremendous, transforming Illyria in ways that went beyond the physical. She became the first true void elf, a being who had successfully merged with the void without losing her sanity or her will. She could shift into a form of pure shadow, wielding powers that rivaled those of the most dangerous void creatures. And yet she remained herself, Illyria Windrunner, hero of the Alliance, devoted to protecting the world she loved. But this power came with constant challenges. The void whispered to Illyria endlessly, trying to lure her into madness. She heard voices that promised power if she would only surrender, that showed her visions of darkness and despair. Every moment of every day required discipline and focus to resist these whispers, to maintain her sanity against the shadow's constant assault. Others followed in Illyria's footsteps, becoming void elves themselves. Most notable among these was Magister Umbric, a blood elf researcher who had been exiled from Silvermoon for his dangerous experiments with void magic. Umbric and his followers had nearly succumbed to the void's corruption when Ilaria intervened, saving them from madness and teaching them the control necessary to wield shadow power safely. These void elves, calling themselves the Rendore, established a base on Telogris Rift, the fragmented remnants of an ancient, void-infested world. This shattered realm floats in the twisting nether, its fragments held together by the residual void energy that permeates everything there. It is a harsh and dangerous place, but it is also the perfect training ground for those who must learn to resist the void's constant assault. Under the guidance of Ilaria and Locust Walker, the Void Elves continue to develop their mastery of shadow magic while constantly battling the whispers that seek to corrupt them. They train not just their magical abilities, but their mental defenses, learning techniques to quiet the voices that speak to them constantly. Some days the whispers are barely noticeable, a distant murmur that can be easily ignored. Other days, they rise to a screaming crescendo, demanding attention, promising power, threatening destruction. The Void Elves have developed rituals and practices to help them maintain their sanity. They meditate together, sharing their experiences with the whispers, reminding each other of who they truly are. They study the nature of the void, believing that understanding the enemy makes it easier to resist. And they fight together against void creatures that emerge from the rifts in Telogris, proving to themselves with each victory that they are still in control. It is a precarious existence, walking forever on the edge of an abyss that hungers to consume them. But they endure, and in their endurance they prove that the void need not be an absolute corrupter. The shadow can be wielded without succumbing to it. The whispers can be heard without being obeyed. This is the hope that the Void Elves represent, a hope that may prove crucial in the battles yet to come. Shadow priests represent another tradition of void-wielding mortals, though their relationship with the void is somewhat different. These dark priests embrace the shadow as a source of power, drawing on void energies to fuel their magic. Unlike void elves, who have been physically transformed by the void, shadow priests remain mortal beings who channel void power through their faith and discipline. The tradition of shadow priesthood traces back to Natalie Celine's studies of the Blade of the Black Empire. The Whispers of Xal'atath taught Celine about the relationship between light and void, and she developed techniques for wielding shadow magic that she passed on to others. Though Celine herself was eventually murdered by her corrupted followers, the tradition of shadow priesthood she founded has continued to the present day. Shadow priests walk a dangerous path, for the void they channel constantly seeks to corrupt them. The insanity mechanic that governs their power in game terms reflects this lore reality. The more deeply a shadow priest draws on void power, the closer they come to madness. It is a constant struggle to maintain control while wielding such dangerous energies. All of these void wielders, from Alaria to the shadow priests to the void elves of Telogris Rift, represent mortal attempts to use the power of shadow without being destroyed by it. Their success demonstrates that the void is not an absolute corrupter, that it is possible to touch the shadow without being consumed. But their constant struggle also shows how dangerous this power truly is, how easily it could overwhelm those who are not eternally vigilant. The most recent chapter in the story of the Void Lord's influence on Azeroth centers on the events of the current age, specifically the machinations of Xal'atath and her Nerubian allies. The expansion known as the War Within represents the beginning of what Blizzard has called the World Soul Saga, a trilogy of expansions dealing with the greatest threats to Azeroth's survival. Xal'atath has emerged from whatever shadows she was hiding in, now styling herself the Harbinger of the Void. Her message is simple but chilling. The Black Empire has fallen. The old gods are dead or defeated, but the Void's cause continues, and she intends to succeed where her predecessors failed. Her strategy centers not on resurrecting the old gods or rebuilding the Black Empire, but on creating something new. She has learned from the failures of the past and understands that a direct approach to corrupting Azeroth's world soul will be met with resistance. Instead, she works through proxies and servants, building an army that knows Azeroth's heroes and will be prepared to counter their strengths. The Nerubians of Xal'atath have become the primary weapon in Xal'atath's arsenal. These descendants of the ancient Akir have lived beneath Azeroth's surface for millennia, developing their own civilization apart from both the surface world and their old god origins. They are intelligent, technologically sophisticated, and commanded by a queen whose word is absolute law. The Nerubian civilization is one of the oldest and most sophisticated on Azeroth. They have developed arts and sciences that the surface races have never imagined, built cities of stunning architectural achievement deep beneath the earth. Their society is rigidly hierarchical, with the queen at its apex and various castes beneath her, each serving a specific role in Nerubian society. That queen, Ansurek, was the daughter of Queen Neferes, the rightful ruler of Xal'atath. Xal'atath appeared to Ansurek and whispered promises of power and glory. She convinced the princess that her mother was holding the Nerubian people back, that under new leadership they could reclaim ancient glories long denied them. All Ansurek had to do was accept Xal'atath's gift and take the throne for herself. The gift Xal'atath offered was the means of dark evolution, a transformation that would make the Nerubians stronger and more terrible than they had ever been. Through void corruption, ordinary Nerubians could become terrifying soldiers, their forms twisted and enhanced by shadow energy. An army of such creatures would be nearly unstoppable against the surface races of Azeroth. Ansurek accepted the bargain, betrayed her mother, and claimed the throne of Xal'atath. Under her rule, the Nerubians have begun their transformation into void-corrupted horrors. The ancient kingdom that once resisted the old god's influence has now become a staging ground for a new assault on Azeroth, this time from within the world itself rather than from without. The heroes of Azeroth have not remained idle in the face of this threat. Warnings have come from various sources, including the Nerubian spymaster known as Widow Arachne, who opposes Ansurek's usurpation and Xal'atath's corruption of her people. Alliances are forming among those who recognize the danger that the Harbinger of the Void represents. The response to Xal'atath's emergence has been unprecedented in its scope and coordination. The Alliance and Horde, those two great factions that have spent so much of their history in conflict with each other, have recognized that this threat transcends their traditional rivalries. Against an enemy that seeks to corrupt the very world soul of their planet, petty political disputes seem insignificant indeed. Ilaria Windrunner has taken a personal interest in opposing Xal'atath. As the only void elf who has successfully mastered the power of shadow without being consumed by it, Illyria understands the threat that Xal'atath represents better than almost anyone else alive. She knows the seductive power of the Void's whispers, knows how easily even the strongest can be corrupted, and she knows that Xal'atath has been listening to those whispers for far longer than any mortal being has existed. The Kirin Tor, that great organization of mages that has protected Azeroth through countless crises, has mobilized its resources against this new threat. Their libraries contain knowledge of the Void accumulated over millennia, and their arcane expertise may prove crucial in countering Xal'atath's magic. The destruction of Dalaran by Xal'atath's forces was a devastating blow, but the Kirin Tor has survived such setbacks before. They will rebuild, and they will continue their eternal vigil against threats to Azeroth. The dragons of Azeroth, those ancient guardians who have protected the world since the ordering of the Titans, have also taken notice of Xal'atath's emergence. The Void has corrupted dragons before, most notably when Neltharion fell to the old god's whispers and became Deathwing. The dragon flights know all too well what can happen when beings of great power succumb to the shadow's influence. They will not let it happen again without a fight. Even the Earthen Ring, those shamans who commune with the elements and maintain the balance of Azeroth's natural forces, have sensed the growing darkness beneath the world. The elements themselves seem disturbed, their usual patterns disrupted by the void corruption spreading through Azj-Kahet. The shamans work to soothe the troubled earth, to maintain the balance that keeps Azeroth stable, while also preparing for the battles that they know are coming. The conflict that follows takes heroes deep beneath Azeroth's surface into caverns and kingdoms they never knew existed. They discover the Hallowfall, an underground region illuminated by a massive crystalline object that provides light to the caverns below. They encounter the Arathi, descendants of human kingdoms who have lived beneath the surface for generations, fighting an endless war against the darkness. And ultimately, they must face Queen Ansurek herself in the Nerebar Palace, confronting the might of a void-corrupted Nerubian empire. But defeating Ansurek and driving back her forces is only the beginning. Xal'atath herself remains at large, her full plans still unrevealed. The Harbinger has been playing a long game for countless millennia, and the Nerubians were only one piece of her larger strategy. Whatever she is truly working toward, it almost certainly involves the world soul of Azeroth itself, that nascent titan that the Void Lords have sought to corrupt since the dawn of time. The war against the Void is far from over. It is, in many ways, only entering a new phase. The old gods may be defeated, but the Void Lords who created them still exist beyond the borders of reality, still hungry to consume all of existence. Xal'atath carries their cause forward, and behind her stand forces and powers that even the heroes of Azeroth may not be prepared to face. To truly understand why the Void Lords and their servants must be stopped, one must grasp the ultimate stakes of this cosmic conflict. This is not merely a battle for Azeroth, or even for the mortal races who inhabit it. This is a war for the survival of existence itself. Every being who has ever lived or will ever live has a stake in this conflict, whether they know it or not. The cosmos is vast beyond mortal comprehension. Billions of stars burn in the great dark beyond. Countless worlds orbit those stars, many of them home to life forms that have never heard of Azeroth or the struggles taking place there. If the Void Lords succeed in their plan, all of these worlds will eventually fall to the shadow. Every civilization, every species, every living thing will be corrupted or consumed. There will be no refuge, no escape, no corner of existence safe from the endless hunger of the void. This is not simply death. Death is natural, a return to the cosmic cycle that the force of death embodies. What the void offers is worse than death. It is corruption, the twisting of everything that exists into a mockery of itself. It is an eternity of shadow and despair, of whispers that drive minds to madness, of reality itself unraveling into nothing. The Void Lord's plan has always centered on the corruption of a Titan world soul. If they succeed in twisting a nascent Titan to their purposes, the resulting Dark Titan would be a being of cosmic power utterly devoted to the void. Imagine an entity with the power to reshape worlds, to command forces that could shatter planets, but whose every thought and an action serves only to spread corruption and despair. Such a creature could move freely through the physical universe, spreading void corruption wherever it went. No force in existence, not even the combined might of the pantheon of order, would be able to stand against it. The Dark Titan would be able to corrupt other world souls, creating more Dark Titans to serve its purpose. It would be able to tear open permanent rifts between the physical universe and the void, allowing the Void Lords themselves to finally manifest fully in reality. It would be the beginning of the end for everything that exists, the first step in an apocalypse that would eventually consume all of creation. The Naru, those beings of light who have fought against the void since the dawn of time, have identified the shadow as a greater threat than even the Burning Legion. The Legion could be fought, its forces defeated, its advance halted. But the void represents something more fundamental, a corruption that eats away at the very fabric of reality rather than merely destroying it. Reports from the realm of death, known as the Shadowlands, confirm this assessment. The void has attacked even that cosmic realm, sending forces described as practically infinite against the bastions of the afterlife. The Kyrians of Bastion barely prevented their realm from being completely destroyed by void invaders. If the void can threaten even the realm of death, no corner of existence is truly safe from its hunger. Azeroth occupies a unique position in this cosmic struggle. The world soul that slumbers within the planet is believed to be the most powerful, nascent titan in existence. The Pantheon has declared that when Azeroth finally awakens, she will be the only titan capable of defeating the Void Lords once and for all. This makes Azeroth both the Void Lords' greatest prize and their greatest threat. If the Void Lords can corrupt Azeroth's world soul before it awakens, they will have their Dark Titan, a being of power sufficient to consume all of reality. But if Azeroth awakens as a Titan of order, uncorrupted by the shadow, she could end the Void Lord's threat forever. The fate of the universe hinges on a single world soul, and the outcome of the endless struggle between those who would protect it and those who would corrupt it. Sargeras understood this in his own twisted way. His assault on Azeroth during the Legion's invasions was not merely an attempt at conquest. He was trying to destroy Azeroth before the Void Lords could corrupt it, to deny them their prize by eliminating the world soul entirely. In his final act, Before being captured by the Pantheon, Sargeras thrust his great sword into Azeroth, wounding the world in a final attempt to achieve his terrible purpose. That wound still bleeds, still weakens Azeroth even as heroes work to heal it. The sword of Sargeras remains embedded in the world, a constant reminder of how close existence came to one form of annihilation. The great blade, larger than mountains, protrudes from the surface of Xal'atath, its corrupting influence contained but not eliminated by the efforts of countless heroes who sacrificed the power of their artifacts to seal the wound. The blood of Azeroth, that substance called azerite, still seeps from the wound Sargeras left behind. This crystallized essence of the world soul is power incarnate, sought after by factions across Azeroth who recognize its tremendous potential. Wars have been fought over azerite deposits. Alliances have been forged and broken over control of this precious resource. And all the while, the world soul continues to suffer, its lifeblood draining away, while those above squabble over the drops. The Void Lords must surely watch this with something like satisfaction, if such beings can experience satisfaction. Every drop of azerite harvested is a drop of power that the world soul will never reclaim. Every war fought over this resource weakens Azeroth and its defenders, making them less capable of resisting the Shadow's influence. The mortal races do the Void's work for them, weakening the very world they claim to protect. And even as that threat continues, another grows. The Void's servants never rest, never cease in their efforts to achieve what the Burning Legion sought to prevent. Xal'atath and her Narubians represent only the most visible threat. In countless hidden places across Azeroth, in forgotten corners and ancient ruins, the Void's influence continues to spread. Cultists gather to worship the Shadow. Madmen hear whispers that promise power. And somewhere in the darkness, forces beyond mortal comprehension continue their eternal patient vigil, waiting for the moment when they can finally claim what they have always sought. The story of the Void Lords is not yet finished. It may never truly finish until either the Void consumes all of reality or is somehow defeated for all time. For now, the battle continues on Azeroth, where heroes stand against the darkness, where Illyria and the Void Elves prove that the Shadow can be resisted, where the memory of the Black Empire serves as a warning of what could happen if the Void Lords achieve their goals. Every victory against the forces of Shadow, every corrupt being redeemed, every Void incursion repelled, represents a tiny step toward ultimate survival. And every defeat, every soul lost to corruption, every advance by the Void's servants brings the cosmos closer to eternal darkness. This is the burden that the defenders of Azeroth carry, the weight of all existence resting on their actions. The Void Lords watch from beyond the borders of reality, patient beyond mortal comprehension, hungry beyond mortal imagination. They have waited since the dawn of time. They can wait longer still. But as long as there are those willing to stand against the Shadow, as long as the light continues to burn in the darkness, as long as heroes rise to defend what they love, there remains hope. Hope that the world soul of Azeroth will awaken uncorrupted. Hope that the Void Lord's plans will ultimately fail. Hope that existence itself will endure, not as an eternity of shadow and despair, but as the endless, vibrant, living cosmos that emerged from the conflict of light and void so long ago. This is the complete story of the Void Lords, from their emergence at the dawn of creation to their ongoing machinations in the present day. It is a story of cosmic horror and existential threat, of patient evil and desperate resistance, of darkness that hungers to consume all things and the light that still burns against it. The lessons of this story are many, but perhaps the most important is this. The void is patient. It does not need to win today or tomorrow or in 1,000 years. It can wait for eternity, probing for weaknesses, whispering to those who might listen, slowly wearing away at the defenses of those who oppose it. Victory against the void is never permanent. Every generation must fight its own battles against the shadow, must find its own heroes willing to stand in the darkness. The old gods may be defeated, but their legacy endures in the corruption they spread, in the whispers that still echo in ancient places, in the madness that can claim those who delve too deeply into forbidden knowledge. The Void Lords may be unable to manifest directly in the physical universe, but their influence seeps through every crack in reality, every moment of despair, every dream that turns to nightmare. And yet, there is cause for hope. Azeroth has faced the Void's servants before and emerged victorious. The Black Empire fell. The old gods were imprisoned and eventually destroyed. Dimensius was fragmented, and Xal'atath was slain. Each victory was costly, each battle hard won, but victory was achieved nonetheless. The heroes of Azeroth carry within them something the Void cannot understand. Hope that persists even in the darkest moments, courage that rises even when all seems lost, bonds of friendship and love that cannot be broken by whispers of shadow. These are the weapons that have turned back the darkness time and again, and they are the weapons that will be needed in the battles yet to come. Consider what the mortal races have already accomplished. They have defeated the Burning Legion, that vast army of demons that had conquered countless worlds across the cosmos. They have broken the Scourge, that undead army that seemed unstoppable when it swept across the kingdoms of the north. They have killed old gods, beings that were ancient when the first mortal civilizations were young. Time and again, when the wise and the powerful have said that victory was impossible, the heroes of Azeroth have proven them wrong. The Void Lords are terrible enemies, perhaps the most terrible enemies that existence has ever faced. But they have limitations. They cannot manifest directly in the physical universe. They must work through servants and corruption, through whispers and manipulation. Their patience, which is their greatest strength, is also a vulnerability. They cannot strike quickly when an opportunity presents itself. They cannot adapt to changing circumstances the way mortal beings can. The battle against the void is not hopeless. It is difficult, certainly. It is dangerous beyond measure. It will require sacrifice and courage and determination from generation after generation of heroes. But it can be won. The light still shines in the darkness, and as long as there are those willing to carry that light, the shadow cannot truly triumph. The world soul of Azeroth continues its slow awakening, growing stronger with each passing year. The champions who protect it grow stronger as well, learning from each battle, developing new strategies and powers to counter the threats they face. The cosmic balance that has kept the void at bay since the dawn of creation still holds, still provides a framework within which the forces of life and order can operate. As you drift toward sleep, let these thoughts be your comfort. Yes, there is darkness in the universe. Yes, there are entities of cosmic evil that hunger to consume all things. But there are also those who stand against them, who fight for light and life and hope. And as long as such heroes exist, as long as there are beings willing to resist the shadow, no matter the cost, the Void Lords cannot truly win. The universe is vast and full of wonders. Stars burn in their billions across the great dark beyond. Life flourishes on countless worlds, each one a miracle of complexity and beauty. Civilizations rise and fall, each one leaving its mark on the cosmos, each one contributing something unique to the tapestry of existence. This is what the void seeks to destroy, this magnificent, chaotic, beautiful creation that emerged from the clash of light and shadow at the dawn of time. And this is what the defenders of existence fight to protect, not just their own lives or their own worlds, but the very concept of existence itself, the idea that something is better than nothing, that light is better than darkness, that life is worth preserving even at tremendous cost. That is the complete story of the Void Lords. If you enjoyed diving into the deepest and most cosmic lore Warcraft has to offer, please leave a like and subscribe. The World Soul saga is still unfolding, and we will be covering every chapter right here on World of Sleepcraft.